In our previous video, we saw the results of the first day of competition here at the Louisville Regional Championships. We saw Raging Bolt as the number one played deck, with several decks following up at 8 to 10%. Moving into the second day of competition, we see Dragapult takes a steep dive off the graphic and is replaced by Charizard Pidgeot. This was perhaps due to Raging Bolt's success and Dragapult's inability to deal with it. The other decks on the graphic remain practically unchanged, with Raging Bolt, Terrapagos, Regidrago, and Lugia upticking a couple percent, and Palkia staying about the same. Now that we've taken a look at the metagame, let's get into Swiss Round 11. Coverage for Day 2 begins in Round 11 with Ciaran Farah against Kyle Lesniewicz. Ciaran is playing the same Lugia list as he played to the Baltimore Regional Championships, where he placed second, and Kyle Lesniewicz is going to be rocking Palkia Dusknoir. One thing to note before we head into the first game is that Ciaran prized his Iron Hands, which is going to be exceptionally relevant to the way the game plays out. Kyle and Ciaran both have solid openings, with Ciaran getting 2 Archeops in the discard pile on turn 1, and the game kicks off on Kyle's second turn of the game. Kyle uses a combination of Dusknoir and Radiant Greninja to knock out Cinccino and Lugia V. This puts him up 2 prize cards and in the driver's seat of this game. Ciaran, with about 10 cards in hand, has the ability to do whatever he wants here. However, he does not have the ability to Iron Hands. If he had access to Iron Hands, he could simply knock out Kyle's Squawkabilly with Impy Very Much, go down to 2 prizes, and then look for a 2-prize knockout to win the game on the following turn. However, without access to that, Ciaran has to get a little creative. He decides to just play it slow and not use something like a Lumineon to boss his orders up the Mew EX, as it would be a major liability. He just uses Tempest Dive to knock out Kyle's Radiant Greninja and is looking to take 2 2-prize knockouts on his following 2 turns. Without an easy knockout to take, Kyle plays an Iono and hits into the Lugia V-Star for 170 damage. With an abysmal draw off of Iono, Ciaran activates Pokestop in the hopes of finding the Iron Hands, which he drew off the prizes. If he was able to Iron Hands the Squawkabilly here and go down to 1 prize, Kyle would be unable to activate Dusknoir, and Ciaran could win the game on the following turn. But without a playable hand, Ciaran just has to settle for a Weird Ear knockout on the Palkia V-Star, and has to hope that Kyle is unable to activate Dusknoir. With an abundance of draw power, Mew EX, Pheasantipity, and Pokestop, it's very likely Kyle is going to be able to pull off the Blood Moon plus Dusknoir combo. However, he makes it look exceptionally easy by mewing into Rare Candy Dusknoir right away and ending Game 1. Moving into Game 2, Ciaran has the opportunity to go first. He uses Squawkabilly and gets 1 Archeops in the discard pile before passing the turn over to Kyle. Kyle has a solid turn of his own, but is only able to bench 1 Palkia V. By flipping heads on Mesagoza, Ciaran is able to punish this by searching out Lumineon for boss's orders, bringing in the Palkia V and knocking it out. Without another Palkia V or Froakie on the board, Kyle is unable to announce an attack. At this point, I think Kyle should just scoop the game and try to win the third game with the ability to go first. However, he prolongs the inevitable and wastes 8 minutes in this game, meaning that we're going to head into Game 3 with only 8 minutes remaining. In Game 3, Ciaran gets off to an exceptionally slow start without an Archeops in the discard pile on his first turn. Kyle is able to get a solid attack off on turn 2 for 200 damage, and Ciaran can't really do much at all. At this point, Kyle pops a Dusclops, knocking out the Weird Ear and ignoring Legacy. Like I mentioned in the last video, Legacy Energy only works if you're knocked out from damage by an attack. Dusknoir is neither damage or an attack, and therefore Kyle draws 2 prize cards for knocking out the Weird Ear. He then punches into the Lugia V for 180 damage, as Ciaran has practically no bench. Subspace Swell is not going to be able to take the knockout. At this point, time is also called just before Kyle is able to announce his attack, meaning that Ciaran is going to be turn 1 and 3 of time, and with only 1 turn left, Kyle is unable to take his remaining prizes, and a game that surely would have ended with Ciaran losing ends in a draw. You can see at the table, Ciaran looks somewhat relieved, even chatting to Kyle, and Kyle looks sick to his stomach, knowing that if he just played a little bit faster, he could have locked up his spot in top 8. Instead, both of these players will now have to play a win-in match in round 12. In round 12, we have Joinville Regional Champion Yerco Valencia up against Michael Lehotsky, who's going to be playing Raging Bolt. Yerco, of course, playing his Lugia V-Star deck, which features an Arven and a Vitality Band. Game 1 is very quick, as Yerco's unable to get a Lugia V down on turn 1. Michael Lehotsky wastes no time and gets attacking right away. Yerco then benches one Lugia V on his next turn, which is knocked out by Raging Bolt and Prime Catcher, at which point Yerco scoops and we go to Game 2. In Game 2, Yerco has the dream setup, getting 2 Archeops in the discard pile and 2 Lugia Vs on the board. This board may look inconsequential, however, I believe the game actually ends on turn 2 as soon as Yerco establishes this board. With only 3 2-prize Pokemon on the board, it appears as if Michael will be able to take 3 2-prize knockouts. However, if Yerco attaches Legacy Energy to any of these 2-prize Pokemon, Michael will be unable to win the game in 3 attacks, and Yerco will have no problem doing so with cards like Blood Moon Ursaluna or Boss's Orders to bring in Squawkabilly and Teal Mask Ogerpon. Because of this dynamic, Michael just decides to knock out Yerco's Mincino, as he won't be able to rush Yerco down on prizes. Once Michael has taken a 1-prize knockout, Yerco is firmly in the driver's seat, as if he just takes a 2-prize knockout every turn of the game, Michael will be unable to win. This is exactly what happens as Yerco gets double Archeops down, powers up his Lugia V-Star, and uses his Vitality Band and a Boss's Orders in order to knock out one of Michael's Ogerpons. Michael returns the knockout with Raging Bolt EX, and Yerco follows up with another knockout on Teal Mask Ogerpon. At this point, it becomes very clear what's happening as Yerco's down to 2 prizes while Michael is stuck on 3. Michael knocks out Yerco's Lugia with Raging Bolt, and Yerco simply nestballs for Blood Moon to close out the game. Heading into Game 3, Chip Ritchie breaks down the top 8 dynamics.
As we're waiting for this game to get underway, our players are almost done setting up. We can update everyone else what has happened out on the floor.
Oh,
of course, the first 2 tables have ID'd, so those 4 players are locked in. But then of our other notable matches, Ciaran was able to win. Kyle Lesniewicz was able to win. Michael Davidson was able to win. So that means that if this game here in the next 13 minutes has a conclusive winner, we're going to have a clean cut of 8 players. No asymmetrical cut today. Only 8 players will move on. But if this 13 minutes goes a little long, if these players are not able to determine a clear-cut winner in 13 minutes plus 3 turns, that means we are going to have a massive top cut with a ton of X and 2s sneaking in.
After losing Game 2, Michael opts to go first, which I believe is somewhat of a mistake. By going second, you provide yourself an opportunity to knock out Yerco's only Lugia and essentially win the game. Michael also has a fairly mediocre turn 1, unable to get down a Raging Bolt. This time, Yerco benches 4 2-prize Pokemon on his first turn, completely changing the dynamic of the game. Even if Yerco attaches Legacy Energy to one of these Rulebox Pokemon, Michael still has 3 targets in order to win the game in 3 attacks. This means that Michael is in the driver's seat if he's able to get a knockout on his next turn. However, due to his slow start and inability to get down Raging Bolt, he has a little bit of an awkward turn 2. This results in him being unable to take a knockout, and he has to pass over the turn to Yerco. Yerco wastes no time using Arven to get out Vitality Band and knock out Michael's Ogerpon with Lugia V-Star. This puts him up 2 prizes and significantly in the lead in this game. The rest of this game plays out similarly to Game 2, where Michael returns the knockouts Yerco is taking, but ultimately ends the game 1 turn behind. Chinchino is going to pick up the last KO with Special Roll, and Yerco advances to our top 8. Before we get into the top 8 coverage, let's take a look at the decks and players that will be playing. Featured already on the stream, we have Kyle Lesniewicz and his Palkia V-Star deck. As well featured already Ciaran Farah and his Lugia Archeops deck, along with a star-studded cast. Michael Davidson made top 8 at the World Championships, Gabriel Smart, a prominent content creator, and Caleb Gedemer, a multiple-time regional champion. In our top 8 feature match, we have 2 younger players, Benjamin Herbert playing Regidrago and Sebastian Lashmet playing Charizard. Sebastian goes first in game 1, getting down a couple of basics and passing it over to Benjamin, who has a reasonable turn of his own, getting down a bunch of basics and a couple energies. The game kicks off on Sebastian's second turn, where he's able to set up a Pidgeot using Arven. If he wanted to, he could have used Pidgeot to set up a Charizard, but instead of opting to set up a Charizard, he took a more conservative approach using Buddy Buddy Poffin to establish more basics, retreating into his Duskull and passing off the turn with Instant Charge. I love this play from Sebastian, as attacking for 180 damage into an Ogerpon is pretty pointless, and you're probably just going to get your Charizard one-shotted by a Myriad Leaf Shower. Benjamin responds to this passive approach from Sebastian by getting exceptionally aggressive. He flips his V-Star power in order to get off a Trifrost from Ciaran. This knocks out all of Sebastian's Charmanders and his Duskull, but fear not, as with Thornton, we can still set up a Charizard EX. After taking a second to plan out the combo, Sebastian Thorntons his Rotom into Charmander, rare candies it into Charizard, and plays a counter catcher to bring in Benjamin's only Ogerpon. With no energies in play and only one bench spot remaining for an Ogerpon EX, Benjamin is limited to just 2 energy cards this turn, which is not enough to use Apex Dragon. Sebastian uses Boss's Orders in order to keep up the race on these 2 prize Pokemon, and he benches a Radiant Charizard with a Fire Energy and a Defiance Band. This means that if Benjamin knocks out Sebastian's Charizard EX, he has the Radiant Charizard waiting, and if Benjamin knocks out the Radiant Charizard, well, then Sebastian just has his Charizard EX. Because of this checkmate position, Benjamin scoops up the game, and we head into game 2. In game 2, Benjamin has the opportunity to go first, getting down a couple of basics and an energy card onto his Regidrago. Sebastian follows up with an exceptional turn 1 of his own, getting down all of his basics and activating Instant Charge to end his turn. Similarly to a game 1, Benjamin gets as aggressive as possible, activating his V-Star power to pull off a turn 2 Ciaran attack. This time, Sebastian has no Pidgeot EX, so his options are going to be a little more limited. However, Sebastian still manages to pull off an exceptional play. He Buddy Poffins for a couple of basics, rare candies his Duskull into Dusknoir, establishes a Radiant Charizard with a Defiance Band, and plays an Unfair Stamp, putting Benjamin down to just 2 cards. I think the icing on the cake here would have been to find a counter catcher off of this Unfair Stamp in order to knock out Benjamin's Pheasantipity. However, I think just knocking out the Regidrago V-Star will do just fine. Benjamin tries to chain together another Regidrago attack, but ultimately comes up a bit short, at which point Sebastian uses his Forest Sealstone to search out rare candies into a Charizard EX, retreats into it, and uses Briar to take 3 prizes and win the game in just 3 turns. It's funny to see an evolution deck like Charizard, which is usually thought to be fairly slow, winning the game in only 3 turns. And it looks like Sebastian is fairly surprised as well. Taking a look at the other side of the top 8 bracket, we have Kyle Lesniewicz up against Caleb Gedemer, who's going to be playing Raging Bolt. The game kicks off on Caleb's second turn when he activates Iron Bundle. Off this Iron Bundle, Kyle decides to send up his Squawkabilly EX, giving Caleb a free 2-prize knockout. I think it would have been much stronger to send up the Duskull and force Caleb to take a 1-prize knockout. After this knockout, Kyle responds by popping a Dusknoir on the benched Raging Bolt and hitting the active Bolt for 200. The idea here is that he doesn't want to activate Pheasantipity EX, but I think it's important to take prize cards while you can. Caleb responds by using Luminion to find Professor Sada's Vitality and take a knockout. With this knockout, Caleb goes down to 1 prize, making the 130 damage on the bench Raging Bolt completely irrelevant, as Kyle cannot pop any more Dusknoirs. Kyle brings up Caleb's Pheasantipity, plays an Iono, and knocks it out. Caleb draws fairly poorly off of this Iono, and has to go for a Burst Roar, discarding his hand and drawing 6 new cards. Kyle, unable to find another Iono, has to just knock out this Raging Bolt and hope that Caleb can't take the knockout with the fresh 6 cards. But of course, Caleb has Professor Sada's Vitality and a couple other energy cards, which is going to allow him to pick up this 2-prize knockout and the game. Moving into Game 2, Caleb has a fairly slow start and starts off the game with a Burst Roar. This allows Kyle to get the first attack into a Raging Bolt for 180 damage. Caleb plays a very significant switch card and attaches a Bravery Charm, putting the benched Raging Bolt out of range of a Dusknoir knockout. After benching a Radiant Greninja, Caleb takes the first 2-prize knockout of the game. Kyle responds by using a Dusclops and Dusknoir on the benched Raging Bolt, attaching an energy to his Blood Moon and knocking out Gedemer's other Bolt. He accompanies this with an Iono, putting Caleb down to just 2 cards and a Radiant Greninja. Caleb doesn't find much off of this Iono, benching a Slitherwing, attaching, and passing the turn. Kyle keeps up the aggression, playing another Iono and knocking out the Slitherwing with Palkia V-Star. Again, Caleb draws a fairly mediocre hand with no support Pokemon in play and ends up losing the game to a Prime Catcher. In Game 3, we see solid openers from both players, except that Caleb misses a Pokemon Catcher on his first attack. He would have loved to have taken out a 2-prize Pokemon, but is going to just have to settle for a Duskull. Kyle responds by popping a Dusknoir and using Palkia V-Star to knock out Gedemer's Raging Bolt. Gedemer hits back with a Raging Bolt, taking out Kyle's Palkia and going down to just 2 prizes remaining. This time he has a board full of support Pokemon, 2 Ogerpons, Pheasantipede, and Greninja, as well as several energy cards already in play. So this time when Kyle plays Iono, Gedemer has no problem drawing the required energies to take the final 2-prize knockout and win the game. Now onto our final match. We have Michael Davidson versus Caleb Gedemer, and as you can see, both of these players are exceptionally accomplished players. Michael's going to be playing Lost Box, and Caleb, of course, with the Raging Bolt. In the first game, we see Michael pop off on the second turn of the game, using double Mirage Gate and Prime Catcher to amp you very much Caleb's Squawkabilly on the second turn. Interestingly though, we don't see an amp you very much emote, potentially missing out on some emotional damage. Caleb responds by knocking out the Iron Hands with Raging Bolt, and Michael responds with a Mirage Gate onto Blood Moon Ursaluna, going down to just 1 prize remaining. Caleb knocks out the Blood Moon with a Raging Bolt with a Bravery Charm, but Michael uses Lost Vacuum, discards that Bravery Charm, decks himself out, and uses Blood Moon again to close out the game. I believe this game is a very accurate representation of how this matchup usually plays out. However, in Game 2, we see an absolute brickfest from Michael, Pokestopping away 3 useless cards and passing the turn off to Gedemer. Gedemer whiffs the turn 1 attack and just has to use Burst Roar, but because Michael's start is so weak, Caleb is still able to bench Michael out in 2 attacks. Moving on to Game 3, we see an awkward start from both players, and Caleb kicks off the game by attacking with Slitherwing on his second turn of the game. Michael responds to this by using Radiant Greninja to knock out the Slitherwing and put some damage on the Pheasantipede, likely setting it up for a Sableye attack. With access to Pheasantipide's Flip the Script, Caleb pops off, chaining together multiple draw card effects, establishing a full board, and even switch carding his Pheasantipede in order to heal it out of Sableye range. He then knocks out Michael's Radiant Greninja with Raging Bolt, and even attaches a Bravery Charm. At this point in the game, Michael makes a very unfortunate gameplay error, retreating his Comfeys twice in the same turn. This double retreat results in a 2-prize penalty, and since Caleb is already ahead, it means Caleb only needs 1 2-prize knockout in order to close out the game. Realizing he's too far behind, Michael concedes the match, and Caleb becomes your TCG Masters Louisville Regional Champion.